you very much. I'm not going to be as exciting as Priscilla, and I'm not going to ask you to clap, but you feel free if you so want. I will start with a very strange beginning to this, and I chose my outfit today because what we wear is an expression of who we are and how we feel. So I chose to wear a piece of Australian artwork. For our Indigenous people, artwork is a very important, expressive piece in their lives. It connects them to country, place, and all of their family and extended community. And this particular piece of artwork is called the black cockatoo. It's a bird, it's very big, but it is also in their spiritual world, the creator of strong women. So I'm not saying anything against the men in this room who can be strong, but this is about the creator of strong women, which is why I choose to wear this pattern. Okay. I am going to try and do what we've asked nobody to do in their classes, and that is, could you cut down what you're going to talk about, do less and do more? I'm going to try and do more and more and more with you in the next 20 minutes, so thank you. I am very excited that I had the opportunity to come and join you, and the invitation from Lynn, and meeting Clara, and meeting all of the teachers. I've been to 6 schools while I've been here, met the creative practitioners, the principals of schools. So it has been a privilege, and the opportunity to do that is very exciting as we look at what we're doing internationally. My background is, as you've seen from the introduction, I'm a teacher by trade. I always will be a teacher. I'm not afraid to tell anyone I'm a teacher. I'm proud of it. But what I now do is actually much more about policy and direction and writing curriculum. I had the pleasure of being appointed to the Strategic Advisory Group for PISA when the OECD decided that they would try and assess critical thinking, creative thinking. Worked very closely with Bill Lucas in doing that, and we're all now sitting nervously waiting for the results of that test to come out, and that will happen next month. All right, so let's get underway. Just to set the scene for what Australian education system looks like, we have about 4 million students in schools. We have about 9,000 schools. All of our students start their first year of school when they're 5 years old. They have to turn 5 in that first year. We have 3 sectors of education. We have government, Catholic and independent. And as I've understood being here, when we talk about Catholic and independent, that would be the equivalent of aided schools, I believe, would be the best description and relationship. And we have 9 education ministers. We have inherited a colonial British system of how you run government. So we have an Australian government, and that's who I work for. And then we have all of our states and territories around the country that all have education ministers as well. I report to all 9. So I've got grey hair for a reason, apart from being old. Trying to work with 9 education ministers at times can be a little challenging, but we get there. So I also want to step back a little, because before moving to work for the Australian government, I actually worked in Victoria, in Melbourne, doing a similar job but at the local level of state government. And when I was working there, the government of the time decided to make education their platform. It was seen as the most important part of what government did was to actually educate, to the point where they even put it on the number plates of all of our cars. So every single person who bought a new car had the education state written on it. No pressure, of course, to any schools or teachers at that stage when that's what the government decided to do. But what I think is equally important, and why I've gone back a little, they actually made a decision that the most important things was reading, maths, science, creative thinking, and the arts. And that was in 2015. They made a decision to actually set a target for improvement in critical and creative thinking. So in 2016, we did a random sample of students who undertook an assessment. So not all of the students in Victoria, a random sample, so it was valid and reliable. And they all undertook an assessment in critical and creative thinking. At the end of that, that meant we could set the benchmark, because if you're going to say something's going to have to improve by 25%, you need to know what your baseline is that you're working from. So it started that we, after the assessment, agreed that we had about 16% of students who showed excellence in critical and creative thinking. And we needed to improve that and take it to 25%. And we had a 10-year time frame for that. As educators, you will understand that you can get a lot of growth in learning from students. That's what we all do every day. But when you get to the top end of excellence and you're trying to improve that, it is slower and harder. That excellence level, and Anna talked about that the other day when we were talking about the amount of hours that you put into dance and learning those skills and practicing them and getting better. So they gave us 10 years to improve that number. It has improved. I no longer work in that system. So what I want to do with you today is actually to talk about how critical and creative thinking was introduced into our curriculum. And we publish what are called the educational goals for young Australians. That is set every 9 years. I'm not sure why it's 9. I've never been sure why it's 9 years. It's just the way it works. So we have had these declarations since 1990, and we continue to put them up. But why I've highlighted this is that the second goal is to be confident and creative individuals. The government makes that statement for our whole country, and if you have that happening at the highest political level, it is much easier to work in the schools with teachers and make a difference. I also did want to put this up because this is the cover of our new declaration from Alice Springs. It's actually produced by one of our First Nations artists in the local area. And you may have seen our First Nations artwork with dots like this one. It is an art style that has to be personalised to a particular area of Australia. If you don't live in that area in Australia, you can't use this type of artwork. I'm wearing something from Queensland, from Brisbane. This is from Alice Springs. So they cannot use those same styles. This is actually to represent water holes, because in the centre of Australia it's very dry. And all of these shapes here represent people coming together and sharing ideas. So when you look at First Nations artwork in that way, that gives you some clues as to the style and the messaging and what they do in their work. So how do we actually embed critical and creative thinking into what we want all young people to learn. The Australian curriculum is designed as a three-dimensional curriculum. So if you consider a Rubik's Cube and how you could move it around, this says very clearly we give our teachers quite a lot of flexibility because they can move it around in the three dimensions. We have learning areas here, we have general capabilities, and we have what are called our cross-curriculum priorities. That is slightly different than the way you talk about cross-curriculum priorities in this project. Just want to make that clear, but we think it's important for all students to understand and have a focus on sustainability. We think it is important that we have all of our young people think about Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. And we think it's essential that our young people know about our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. What you will see here are the capabilities that we talk about, and this is where you will see critical and creative thinking. But I have also highlighted the personal and social capability. The reason for doing that is around the world, we all do these differently. But actually, when you start to look at it in fine detail, it's the same. We might put it in a different category, we might give it a slightly different title, but the intent and understanding is exactly the same. So I've done this today for this presentation because I understand when you're working with 5 Cs or think, see, wonder, you're going to find them in 2 places in our curriculum. So I'm heading that way. The other thing I would also say to you, we always talk about critical and creative thinking. The reason for that, and if any of you think about your lives, sometimes when you're faced with a decision or looking at options, you're doing both. You're actually being critical, you're analysing something, you're considering it deeply, and you're also then making decisions that can be creative, problem-solving, interesting directions. We did a lot of research in this space, and we found that these 2 things need to be together, and we proved through some research that that's what happens with students. Our research was quite interesting because lots of people go, that student's quite creative. And then they go, this student over here loves maths. Are they going to be good at the creative thinking? We set up an exercise which actually shows that it doesn't matter what we might think those students are good at, critical and creative thinking comes together. Just to also explain that in our arts, so in this learning area here, we actually have 5 subjects: dance, drama, media arts, music, and visual arts. So students are exposed to all of those subjects in every year. What I also want to understand, sometimes we talk about the curriculum without us all having a common understanding of what that word means. In Australia, when we talk about the curriculum, we're talking about a set of knowledge, understanding and skills that we expect students to learn as they progress through their first 11 years of schooling. They then move into senior secondary, getting exams and moving into universities after that. But we outline that. So the simplest way that we talk about our curriculum, it explains what to teach, and it explains the standards that we expect the students to achieve. That is our curriculum. What we will see a little later on is that the teachers are the ones that decide how to teach. So there is a very big distinction between what to teach, what to assess, but how to teach it in the mix of that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of detail about critical and creative thinking. I'm not going to go into great detail, but in Australia, we describe this as having 4 components: inquiring, generating, analysing, and reflecting. You will also see there's some additional bullet points underneath those, so we tease out. So we use the big 4 as the signposts of the ideas, and then we talk about the smaller parts underneath that to help teachers unpack it. Because if I just put up a heading going inquiring, would we all have the same understanding of that word? Would we all decide to teach something in the same way? So we give them more detail. I've also put, as I said, the personal and social capability up, because in here we have reflective practice, we have perseverance and adaptability, and we have communication, collaboration, and decision-making in this curriculum. A teacher can combine those in any way they like. The Rubik's Cube, they can twist it and move it and deal with it how they like. So, how do we support teachers and schools to deliver the Australian curriculum? As I said, we expect our teachers have been trained, they're professionals, they've gone to university, they have degrees, so we leave them with a lot of flexibility in this section. Of course, we put out advice and support materials, but we do give great flexibility. To explain, if you've been to Australia, I hope you liked it. Hope you will come back. But we have a very large country. I can get in a plane on one side of our country and fly for 6 hours, and I am still in our country. It is huge. So it is very important that teachers can contextualise it to the setting they work in. If they are working in inner city, in a poorer socio-economic group, they can tailor what they're doing to what makes sense to that setting, compared to an Indigenous First Nations students who might go to a school that's got 10 students in it, 1 teacher, and it might take 5 hours to drive to the closest shop. So the examples and the way you ask them to think and work is very different. So we have to take that into account as we're doing this work. Very quickly, the Australian curriculum is a public document. It's a public open website that anyone can look at. We designed it in a particular way, and this helps understand how we think about this. We design it so that a teacher can put Year 3, Year 4, Year 5 all on the same screen to look at what to teach. It is important to understand where they're coming from, what they're doing when you have them in your classroom, and where they are going to. If we cannot see that continuum, we are missing an extremely important part of education. It is always about progressing learning. It is always about getting better. And so we design a curriculum that helps teachers see that and work with that when they're doing their planning. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 challenges of embedding critical and creative thinking into a system. The first one is, how do you know and support teachers to become deeply familiar with what is to be taught. And I stress the deeply familiar. The more familiar and confident and comfortable you are as a teacher about what you are about to teach, obviously the better you are at doing that. I think we understand we all need to see and be able to articulate what we're working for and to. So we spend quite a bit of time in this space. So I'm going to ask you to do this just by yourself, thinking, reflect on a time when you were a creative thinker. Just reflect. And then think about, what were you actually doing when you were that creative thinker? I am sure all of you have very different thoughts going through your head. And when you first started thinking about when was I creative thinking, you might have actually changed that view once you started to think about what was I doing. So we talk to teachers a lot about how is it defined or described. Is there terminology that we want all young people to learn so they can express themselves, so they understand this language of critical and creative thinking? Do the teachers and students have consistent views? We have about 20,000 teachers in Australia. It's pretty hard to get 20,000 people to ever have a consistent view on anything. We try our hardest and we do everything we possibly can, but we know there are always the outliers in a process. And it comes down to confidence, and I must say it has been a pleasure to see the teachers in the schools in Year 3 in this project and the confident way that they've actually undertaken the tasks. You could see it, you could feel it, and it was a great privilege to be part of that. Just going back to our curriculum, we go deeper and we give teachers more information. So when we have something that says we want to talk about how to develop questions, we then give them more detail underneath that. What does that really mean? Interrogate what developing a question would look like. I'm going to go to challenge 2, and that is about how do you progress learning? What does more sophisticated critical and creative thinking look like? Can you describe it? So, take a moment. Could you describe what it would look like for a 9-year-old compared to a 14-year-old? The challenge is that if you can't describe that, you actually don't have the roadmap to get the students to be more sophisticated. So we need to think about what expectations we hold for the students in the classroom. We need to know if a student has learnt about creative thinking. And you might remember the title of my slide was Assessment 2. I'm a very strange person. I love assessment. I love curriculum and I love assessment because they are not two separate things. They are inextricably joined together. And when we keep talking about them separately, we're doing everyone a disservice. We are not helping teachers and we are not helping students. And I must say that when I talk about assessment, I am very, very driven by formative assessment, not summative assessment. Absolutely, all of the research evidence will tell you the best way to get students to reach higher results is to look at formative assessment, not summative. So I want to weave that into what I'm going to talk to you about. This is what our curriculum looks like. This is what I have to teach in the first year, second, third, and so on and so on. What you will see, if I could just get my flicker to work, that we have this progression. For example, this is starting off talking about curiosity. What's the curiosity of these young people? And as Clara talked about yesterday, we probably lose some of that as they grow and attend. But over here, we're up to hear about abstract ideas. So all of our curriculum is written in this model. And this is what is available to all of our teachers to support what they're doing. This makes it easier, not harder. If you have all of this, it is much easier. All right. So challenge 3 is, how do you find an authentic application for this? There is no point talking about this in a theoretical, abstract way, and that's what's so fantastic about the project, is that it actually embeds it. It makes it real. There is a purpose for what you're doing when you're in that classroom. And I believe there are 4 parts to this. You have to be very clear about how to introduce the concepts, to get them started. Think about it. Then we have to give them opportunities to practice it, to apply it, and while they're applying it, they're demonstrating whether they understand creative thinking. That is, in fact, another word for assessment. And that doesn't happen at the end. It happens from the very moment they stepped into that classroom with you. The last part, which I absolutely think is so essential in this process, is deploying it. So can I take what I've learnt in that classroom, in that lesson, and see it anywhere else? Deploy it. When I need it, it is going to come to my mind and I'm going to be able to use it. Just to show you something off our website. So our teachers can filter our curriculum and look at it solely from the lens of critical and creative thinking. If they do that, we tell them where we think it is most authentically applied in a subject. So this is English, this is humanities, this is science, this is technology and art. Art. So we give our teachers a few more ideas and suggestions about where it might fit and how they can work with it. For the rest of where I'm going now, I'm going to concentrate on this very small part of the curriculum to demonstrate some other things to you. And we're going to all pretend we're teaching year 3 and 4. Okay? So here what it says we have to do is to consider alternatives. We've got to compare different or creative ways to approach something, and we've got to be able to recommend a preferred option. So I'm not just, oh, I'll look at those 2 things by this stage. It is actually, I'm looking at them for a reason, and I need to be able to describe what I'm seeing or doing. The more they can talk about it, the better it is. Okay, so now we've all got that idea into our heads. You would need to come up with a whole range of things. So you introduce that concept. Students then start thinking about it, working with it. Then you actually get to practice it. How do I practice this? Now, I'm not suggesting these are the only ways, but If I was actually setting up to teach a lesson on looking at alternatives, there are some organising ways that you can do that. There are some structured strategies that you can actually apply, and they vary. I could set up a grid. I could ask the students to do a Venn diagram and show me what's different. I could actually use the pros and cons chart. I could actually do weighting and ranking. So if we give these skills and strategies to students, they can use them in whatever setting and whenever they need them. And they don't all have to be used all of the time. You need to learn to use the best one for the outcome you're looking for. All right. So demonstrate. How do we demonstrate, assess this part of the curriculum? So I've created a very, very small lesson here, quick lesson, okay? I know you're all super educated and intelligent, so you should be able to get through the Year 3-4 assessment, okay? You'll be fine. So, now you will see that I call this a task or an activity. I do not call this an assessment. And that is where you don't have to see them as separate. If I go into a classroom and say to the students, have you ever thought about a bike going in water? And then I give them the stimulus. Here's 2 pictures of a bike in water. Then I say to them, what do these 2 bikes have in common? Then I ask them, what are the differences you can see in these 2 bikes? Then I say, if you were trying to get fit, which bike would you choose and why? The why is the most important part of that actual activity. If you were trying to design a bike that could go in water simply to have fun, what features would be important to you? So we're now talking about setting alternatives. We're evaluating alternatives. We're thinking about the criteria. And then you could only include 2 of these features on your bike. What would you choose and why? We are now back up to this part, which is about a recommended, preferred option. If you were doing that in a classroom, you're teaching this activity and asking the questions of students, and they can be drawing bikes, they could be making model bikes, they could be doing all sorts of things. Every time they're answering those questions, they're telling you what they know. If you are tuned into that, if you go into that lesson with that intention, you are actually involved in formative assessment. It's not the end, it's the middle. And if I have a student who can't answer E, the bottom part, I know I have to support them and help them be able to do that. And I need to be observing them and being prepared. You have to be so conscious of this as you walk into the classroom. You could have set up a chart so you can make some quick notes from the students as you're walking around watching them. They could be having these discussions in groups. The group could report back and you make a note to say that group worked well, they got to that point. I need to move on, they've told me over here. I actually just want you to know you have to plan for assessment. If you're clear about your intention when you walked into that classroom, you should plan for assessment. I think we're going to make these slides available to everyone, so you will have all of these. I hope that's okay, Lynn? Yes? Okay. This is another way of doing it. You can run a scenario. And I could give different scenarios to different groups of students. This was a simple one about if you've been given the job of going to buy a birthday cake for your mother. These were all different scenarios that asked them to think about options, and not one of them has a right answer. Not one. So the other thing I just want to share with you and what I've learned about assessment is when you are setting something up for students and you're going to ask them for some ideas, give me 2 ideas about this. If you fill in the most obvious idea, the first one that you think most students will go to, take that option away from them and push them to think of more. It makes a difference. Here's my summary. I will be quick, I promise. Assessment is not separate to teaching. The best assessment occurs when students don't even know they're being assessed. They're not trying to prove anything. You are observing them and understanding what they can do. It's not a test at the end. Every step along the way matters, every step. And be clear about what you want them to learn and the opportunities you're going to give them. We talk to our teachers about being quite clear at the beginning of the lesson about what are the learning intentions for every student in that classroom. It's not supposed to be a surprise to them. It's not supposed to be hidden from them. If you are upfront about that, they have tuned in to what you're asking them to do. Think carefully about them. I will move. You can see I'm still talking about this one bit. What would that look like in a maths class now? Could I apply that in maths? Could I apply that in science? Could I apply that in visual arts? That's the deployment stage. What have we learnt in Australia? It's essential in the curriculum. It's not an add-on, it's not an afterthought, it's essential. People who get employed and get promoted in workplaces are the people who are critical and creative thinkers. They problem solve, they can look outside the box. So, I've walked you through these things in this presentation. The last part for me is the most important. It's the journey that's most important as the end product in creative thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for sharing your valuable experience to embed CCT, critical and creative thinking, into the education system. I find your presentation very enlightening. And I guess most of us in this room will find the vertical learning progression charts and the assessment rubrics particularly impressive. We envy you in that aspect. I'm glad that the rubrics and all you have mentioned will be made available to every one of us here, and the website is made accessible to the public as well. So we can learn from them by looking at the website. It provides very useful reference for educators in Hong Kong. I would like to respond to the challenges that you mentioned. In Hong Kong, since the launch of the education reform in the first or 2 years of the century, we have already had several waves of reform taking place in Hong Kong, each with a very different focus. For example, it was about quality assurance in 2002, 2003. And I remember at that time, the schools are required to write strategic business plans. But this is very strange to the teachers and school principals. And, well, they got very frustrated. And that's why we have to go in and help them. Because they are not trained to write business plans. So what they want guidelines, templates, and examples. So this frustration repeats every time there's something new coming up. So, for example, the CCT, this is also an essential part of the curriculum in Hong Kong. And when this appears, we're very frightened again. But we don't need to argue about the why we should do this, because we all agree CCT is every student need to acquire the 21st century competency. But we are still worried about the what and the how. And Sharon gave us a very good examples of the four steps model, the 4 elements. That I find that is very clear and easy to follow. And also, not to mention about the rubrics and the progression charts. I like them very much. But as a teacher educator myself for over 2 decades, looking from the teacher's point of view, I would like to learn more about how you provide support to the teachers in implementing this new curriculum. Can you say something more about this?
Because of our very strange system of an Australian government and then all the states and territories, money is basically distributed from the Australian government to all the states and territories for them to implement the curriculum. So we do develop up some common resources for them all to have access to. We offer professional learning for teachers to attend. We also design some of that as what we describe as on-demand. So they're self-directed, you can go and look at them at a time that suits you. We understand the challenge of teachers coming out of schools to attend professional learning. It's very difficult, and I know you fought very hard to do 7 days of training with them. It is really important, but we also understand we have to work in our political environment, and so we develop up materials that can be done on demand. We also brought a group of teachers in to work with us for quite a while. We seconded them out of their schools, and we asked them to develop up some sample materials. I stress the word sample because you know what happened? They become the must-do versions. And they were not meant to do that. It didn't matter how big I put the word sample on it or draft, people still took them and thought, that's what I have to do. But what was important for us was to actually share a number of teachers' view of that, to show that it could be tackled in a lot of different ways.
Okay, so I think you'll get constant feedback from the practitioners. How often do you update the content in the website?
Once again, political. We have to balance making sure that it reflects any new research evidence and changes that we might need to address, compared to teachers have done a lot of work to prepare to teach it, and they don't really like it very much when you take some of it away and change it.
Yeah.
Teachers are not, I'm a teacher, I've said this, teachers are not very good at stopping teaching something. We're very, very good at putting more and more and more, but we never want to take this bit out and say, stop doing it. So when we change the curriculum, we now publish what are called comparative documents. So we actually show the teachers what we took out, so they can actually stop doing that bit and do this bit instead. Officially, at the moment, our whole curriculum is reviewed every 6 years.
Every 6 years,
Don't tell the ministers I talked about this here. I am trying to get that to be extended, simply because teachers take a little while for the curriculum to settle in, that they get comfortable, they're better at it. And the idea of taking it away from them so early is actually not helpful for the profession. So we understand we might need to do smaller iterative changes, but we do want to set a time frame when everything is reviewed together. Because if you, for example, review maths first, then all the decisions about where math concepts are being introduced then influences how the science curriculum's written. But if maths does it first, science always comes along and goes, that's not fair, we wouldn't have wanted it like that, we want this. So we set a period for the whole review, and we have the capacity to do smaller iterative reviews along the way, based on research, based on feedback from teachers, to get the best result.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Professor?
First of all, thank you. Thank you, Sharon, for a really comprehensive and fascinating overview of the CCT curriculum in Australia. I think the first confession I have to make is that I am no education expert there. I'm probably one of the few people here who haven't gone through teacher's education, teacher training in Hong Kong there. I guess AFTAC wants me here because I have been an arts manager for close to 40 years and also have trained many arts managers here. In fact, my knowledge of education and pedagogy really began about 20 years ago when I started designing arts management programs. Of course, these has to go through accreditation and all that. So then I realized what is the rubrics, what is intended learning outcomes and all those things there. But I love it. I guess partly because I like tables and templates. I guess this is rather rare, isn't it? There. It took me a while, but I really love it there because I think it's so important, both in education and in anything else, to have a structure, an evidence-based approach to everything. Then you can justify to yourself, to others, that what you're doing is right or not right, and room for improvement, and all that. So I think that's very important. I'm going to share a few things that your inspiring presentation has reminded me to think about. First of all is actually what you talk about in CCT learning, the four elements of inquiring, generating, and analyzing, and reflection. In fact, I've been using that in my arts management courses, in at least 2 of the courses, without knowing that can be, of course, that can be one of the objectives there. I use it in a course which relates to creative programming, which means designing arts carnivals, arts events for the public there. And another course is on practical training, practicum in arts management. So students actually have to work in groups and implement or execute arts projects there. So as you can see, the whole thing is something that the whole assignment or the involvement lasts for maybe 2 months at least there. So that's why formative assessment is possible there. And we have really used a similar model that you talk about, that getting them first to ask questions, identify the challenges and the objectives, and then generate ideas, see the options of how, what can be the options, and evaluate them, analyze them, and comes the end of the project, the reflection comes in. And here, I think, to me, that's particularly important there, because I think eventually, it's if they are able to self-reflect, then they are more able to use that, to deploy that in other areas. So we try to put in different types of self-reflection, group review, sharing, individual self-reflection reports, and also surveys along the way there. So things like that, I think, are very useful. And the other day, I was curious and asked Sharon about this template. The one thing I think that could be conducted further would be in university. I think many university programs now actually encourage our students to keep learning logs there, or portfolio learning and all that. I think if students have ownership of their learning, then it can be so much more effective. And Sharon shared with me that in Australia, they leave it to the schools to decide whether they require students to do that. That I think is very effective. The second point, a quick one, is that I believe having participated in this forum for 3 years and also learning from the keynote today and yesterday, I firmly believe that actually all arts managers and artists should go through at least one course of education in their training. There, I think it's obvious for it's obvious for arts managers, I guess, because all our arts groups need to work with schools, and so they need to know the educational impact. But for artists, I think it's also very important because it's one way that they need to know how to connect with the society there, and they need to see the educational impact of what they can do. And also from your sharing, I think today and yesterday, we learned it's actually also good for themselves because we're talking about lifelong learning there. Our artists need to be lifelong learners. They need to be reminded to constantly move out of their comfort zone there. That's, I think, the reason for the course. And finally, just a small point. I think we saw a video of the parents of a parent workshop yesterday. I guess AFTEC did it because they want the parents to buy into the project. But I guess perhaps many of you, like me, see a huge potential for such workshops for the parents there. I think many parents are very willing to pay for such workshops. And I think it's very meaningful because it seems to me, a lot of CCT can be done at home there. And the parents should have to have ownership of this learning process. And it's also so good whilst they do it, I guess the parent-child relationship would increase and all that there. So thank you again for your inspiring sharing, Sharon.
I agree entirely about having a common language that can facilitate discussion among the different stakeholders, teachers, students, as well as parents. I don't know how, do you conduct workshops for parents?
That's very much up to the individual school, but we do know many of them do. And the structure in Australia is that schools have to meet with parents twice a year to talk about how the students are going. So many of them do take that opportunity to educate the parents. But when we publish our curriculum to everybody, parents can check what is expected to be learned. So many parents do that and then spend a lot of time complaining to the school. But we believe it should be open and transparent.
It's time to leave it to the floor, Q&A. Anyone want to ask any questions? Yes.
Thank you for your very insightful sharings. And I'm just curious, when you implement this curriculum change, I think there should be a lot of experience in teaching the common languages concepts as well as the approaches to all the CCT, right? So what can be done in such a vast countries and with diversities in the system? So this is my first questions. And the second it would be when there's a scaffolding and progressions across the schools, and also the contextualization is important, as you mentioned. So in terms of implementation, how we like the teacher may overteach or different things. And so is that the variety or diversity across the schools, across the cities or provinces matters, and how would you need to, is there a need to align that or just leave it as it is? I think that we're very curious how your experience in the Australian schools. Thank you.
It's, excuse me. We give a minimum of 12 months to our teachers to become familiar with the curriculum before they teach it. So if we change anything, they have 12 months to look at it, think about it, talk about it, arrange it. So, and in some states at the moment, because we've just reviewed our curriculum 2 years ago, some of our states and territories have actually decided to give them 2 years to actually implement the new version. That depends on how they structure the support that they give to the teachers in the states and territories, and some of that is dependent on how big the state or territory is, because geographically, if you want to go and give teachers professional learning and you have to catch a plane for 5 hours, you have to drive for 6 hours, and you finally end up in the school to run some professional learning, it's immensely difficult in a very large geographical country, and it's resource intensive. So training up people who are basically teachers to go and teach other teachers about how to do this is very, very challenging. So in that challenge, we work to actually provide what we think is a curriculum that is easy enough to make sense of by yourself. As a bare minimum, I should be able to read a document and understand what I'm being asked to teach. If you can't, I didn't do my job very well. So, and I know some of my staff would tell you I send things back and go, that doesn't make any sense. Makes sense to you as the expert in it, but it may not make sense to a teacher who's not an expert in it, so rewrite. So there is a lot of flexibility. Do we get worried about it being equal? No, we don't. Actually, we don't. Because the way we talk about curriculum and what all of the research tells us, and you will know this, in any classroom, the abilities spread from here to here. The research in Australia says there is about 5 years of learning difference between the lowest student and the highest student in your classroom, in the average classroom. How do you level that out? You actually can't. You keep trying because you want to enable all of these students who are struggling down here to get to the standard. But do we really believe that every student leaves school with exactly the same level of education? No, they don't. So we talk to our teachers about they can be along that continuum and you need to cater for their needs. That might mean that these groups do something that's slightly easier to build along. And, you know, going back a very long way in educational philosophy about the zone of proximal development, if you go too far from what the student knows now, they give up. They're not engaged, they're struggling, and they don't want to be there with you anymore. So it is much better to go back and tailor something to being a little easier with a bit more scaffolding so they can get through the process to enable them to keep progressing. So do we get worried about what's level? No, we don't. We trust the professions of teachers and we continue to touch base, and states and territories have a number of ways of managing it, but it's not a major focus.
There'll be room for one more question.
Sharon, thank you so much for your sharing this morning. Actually, I'd like to follow up a little bit on what you just said. It was the question that I had in mind. You showed us that when setting the long-term plan, I think it was a 10-year plan, one of the outcomes would be achieving excellence in CCT. At that point, I had a question in my mind. Why is it only excellence and not, say, raising the average CCT level by a certain percentage? Would that create an issue where teachers focus on the excellent students and at the
grow
expense
the
of
excellence and don't worry about the others? No, it hasn't done that at all. We actually, while the target talks about year 10, we actually test for that particular state. That's not countrywide, by the way. That's in one state they do that, which is the state I came from. They also assess year 6s. So the year 6s do a random sample assessment and year 10s do as well. So they actually get a sense of the spread of year 6s, and they also get a sense of the spread of year 10. So they do have the data about the spread, so they know what's happening. They can see the curve and the spread of where the students are at. But the only reason we could do that was because we had actually developed assessments which were psychometrically validated, and we could put them on a scale and we could track progress. The other states, this is where the state and territory rivalry, none of us would understand rivalry between different funding organisations. The other states and territories don't have access to those assessments. Not yet. I'm still working on it. I helped develop them. I've spent 10 years developing them. They were the basis for the creative thinking PISA assessment structure. So it's a very interesting and difficult concept. Even setting those targets in Victoria was quite controversial at the time. The teachers were like, whoa, hang on, we're going to have to now we're going to have to really focus on this. It settled once they realised it was a long term, we'd be able to give them back data, they could see how we were going. They were not going to be in trouble for what was happening each year. It was more about, we want to be aspirational as an education system. So let's set aspirational targets. We did spend a long time talking about whether it was 10% or 15% or half. So we did, and then we spent quite a lot of time looking at the assessment data to decide what is a cut point for excellence. What does excellence look like? And we could only do that because we had an enormous amount of data from the students doing all of those assessments. And all of those assessments are scenario-based assessments. So the students are given every piece of information in front of them in the assessment. The only thing they have to bring is their ability to think critically and creatively.